welcome to another episode of my podcast, One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. I'm your hostess, Caitlin, with 20 plus years experience in sewing and 12 plus years experience in the hobby of living history. This podcast explores things such as myth debunking, historic wardrobes, some of my research, and also some about how I have incorporated things I've learned from history into my everyday 21st century life. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I would love it you would consider subscribing to follow along. Last time we looked at historical clothing resources, and how to use them as a group to get a more complete picture of historical dress. And this time we're going to dive into a little mini series. Actually, it's going to be our first episode. It's going to be all one episode. And then as I started writing the script, and I got way more than I usually write down for a script, and I was only 100 pages into a 500-page resource. So I knew this was going to be, it's probably going to be a 4 to 5 part series. But it's going to be fun. So we're going to talk about employments and professions that women had access to in the mid-19th century, which I think is going to be very interesting because a lot of people do think that, back in historic times, men went out and did work and women stayed at home and did everything in the house. And that's not always how that worked. A lot of women did have professions. A lot of their professions were at home. They did like work from home situation like we sometimes do. Sometimes they helped their husband with their business, but very rarely did a woman do nothing to help with income. Usually it was either a joint husband and wife or they keep a shop together, or they are farmers together, or also the wife may work as well. Some families, yes, the husband did go off and do something and the wife stayed at home, but it was a little bit more nuanced than we today often think. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We are going to look at an 1863 book today. It's by Virginia Penny. It is called The Employments of Women, the Encyclopedia of Women's Work. She was a northern woman from the northern parts of the United States who in the middle of the American Civil War published this book. It's a little over 500 page book. And it's just literally, she has it organized by section. Like there's a mechanical section, and there's like a farm and agriculture section, and like a business section. And then under each section, there's just dozens and dozens of professions listed in alphabetical order. And sometimes she writes like a short paragraph about how women could do this or what this profession is. And sometimes she writes pages and pages and pages on a single profession. This woman put in a lot of research for this book. There are professions in here that I didn't even process had people actually doing them, and it makes sense now that I've thought about it, but things you wouldn't even think about. And she talked to them about, do you employ women? If you do, are women as good as men in this profession, or are they not as good, or are they better than men? Do you prefer to employ women, or do you prefer to employ men? How much do women make? How much do women make in comparison to the men? Why is that? If there's a difference, why is that? Do you think this profession is suited to women? She asked so many questions, and then she would also go into establishments and talk to people. She would even tour facilities like factories and that sort of thing if they allowed her to. She would tour them and actually talk to the women. Like, this woman put years and years and years of research into this book, which quite frankly is highly impressive. She was very dedicated to her book. I am going to quote the book, like I'm going to use just words from the book once we get into that section, but I'm not going to read you the whole thing. I'm going to read you the profession itself, and I'm going to read you the first sentence that's usually describing what the profession is, and then if there's any salary information or any just what I thought interesting information, I will just pick those sentences out. And so everything is quoted from the original, it just may not be exactly as written. I'm not reading a 6-page chapter essentially on female doctors in the mid-19th century. However, if you're interested in learning more about female doctors in the 19th century, obviously you can go read the book. I have it in the description. There's also a really good 1860 or 1862 Godey's article on female physicians. I'll have to look that up because I do know that it exists. So before we actually really get into it, I do want to go over some background knowledge, just so we kind of ground ourselves in the mid-19th century to realize what is normal, what is not normal, because she kind of obviously assumes that her readership is living in 1863. And so us in the 21st century, we're looking through this and we need to have a little bit more context to understand what's going on. Class structures worked very differently in the mid-19th century than they work today. The vast majority of people in the mid-19th century were working class people. In fact, if we applied 19th century class ideals to the 21st century, then the majority of us today are also working class, or would also be working class. If you work for a living, you are working class. This is also a time where we start to see the rise of the middle class, and these are mostly going to be people who manage or oversee people in the working class. But they had a little bit less responsibility on the day-to-day actual work task, but they still dealt with things such as advertising or paperwork. They were just more managerial in their profession. And of course, there are leisure class people who had people to oversee the people who are working, you know, that sort of thing. Of course, there's so much more than that. Victorian class structures are very hard to break down in the paragraph that I have, but maybe one day we can do like a whole deep dive into class structures in the mid-19th century, because I think it's very important when we start talking about living history and doing personas. A lot of people say, oh, I would be from the middle class, and then they start saying, oh, we're farmers, and I'm like, well, likely you could be middle class, you could even be leisure class as a farmer. It depends on how your farm's set up. But if you're just meaning like your average farmer, then you're working class. Or they'll say, oh, I'd be a shopkeeper. I'm keeping my own shop, so I'm middle class. You're working for a living, you're working class. You're upper working class, but you're working class. But I do want to point out that nearly everybody in the mid-19th century is going to be working class. If you work for a living, you are working class. Now, a lot of them were upper working class because there are those distinctions in the mid-19th century, whereas we don't see those distinctions very well. They would have things, you'd have, desolate, or like people in your poorhouse or your almshouse. And then you have lower working class, you have middling working class, you have upper working class, you have lower middle class, you have middling middle class, upper middle class. So there's a lot more emphasis on class structure, and where you were in society was, more or less important. It was more important than it is today, at least. And I also want to go into salary for a little bit, just to ground ourselves into what was average in the mid-19th century as we start talking about what women would be making, what your hourly or weekly or daily rate was. That way we can kind of understand where the average person fell, where the average household fell in the mid-19th century. So comfortable working class or upper working class would be earning about $400 to $500 a year. This is where Anna Alcott Pratt, Louisa May Alcott's sister, this is where she and her husband were. Her husband was a bookkeeper. They lived in a very wealthy, larger town, essentially. They talked about themselves as being poor. She calls herself poor. Her husband makes $500 a year, which is about average for the whole of the U.S. Now, when you start looking at different areas, obviously some areas cost more to live in than others, same as it is today. California is expensive today to live in. It was also the same back in the 1860s. If you live closer to a more metropolitan urban area, you're likely going to have a higher cost of living than if you are in a more rural area. But also sometimes the really rural areas could incur some more cost as well, as things are being shipped over that may add to the cost of the goods that you are consuming. And so all that kind of has to be factored in. But her family earns about an average salary for the US. However, because they live in a larger, more urban area, it's a lower income. Now, their $500 a year, if they were in a more rural setting, would probably have a lot more buying power than where they currently are at in the big city. But also, you don't tend to have a lot of bookkeepers if you're not in the big city. That's where all the businesses are. So it's kind of a trade-off. You'd have to find a different profession, likely, if you went to a more rural area. Now, the report of the Special Commissioner of the Revenue in the year 1868 has some lovely charts about price increases from 1860 to 1867, likely occurring because of the American Civil War, at least in part. It includes a lot of lovely charts just about the year 1860, so around the time that Mrs. Penny is starting to write her book. And again, because of war and other factors, I'm sure prices exponentially increased by 1867. Goods were now costing about 88% more within that 7-year time frame. I know we're going through a similar increase in our prices today, so we can really relate to people back then and how that was very devastating and also very hurtful to families who are barely making it before, whose income may slightly increase, but not keeping up with the cost of goods. Now, their wages were exponentially increasing as well. We've seen this before in the U.S. As well. You got to think about what the average wage was even 50 years ago and what the average household income is nowadays. Is quite a bit higher. Now, the book we're looking at was published in 1863, but a lot of her research was a little bit earlier, so we're going to look mostly at the 1860 standards and go, this is about what was normal. So when we talk about professions and salaries, we're going to be looking around that $500 to $600 mark is going to be average. Like you're making the average what everyone in the U.S. is making. It was also pretty much well known that women generally made a fraction of what men would make. That was just expected most of the time. Sometimes it was because women didn't work the hours that men did. Oftentimes it was because there was, whether it's true or not, I don't know, I'm not in the past, it may be, but women didn't do the work or the detail work or as hard of work as the men did, so therefore they just made less by default. And there's a couple places where someone mentioned, oh, we have a woman who does as much work as the men. So we pay her like the men because she does that type of work. But the rest of the women don't do that type of work, so they get paid less. And so they tended to have that thought process. So I feel like that's really relevant to talk about as well. They were more of how much work you were doing is how much you're paid. We're not just paying women less just because they're women. We're paying them less because they're doing different work and they're doing less work and not as detailed or difficult work as the men are doing. So do just keep that in mind as well. So let's go ahead and get started. The first section is professional, literary, and scientific pursuits. The first profession is amanuenses. Amanuenses are employed to write from dictation, generally by authors. Authors of distinction can afford to pay a good price, and the most common salary is $600 a year. Astronomers. Maria Kunitz is mentioned as an astronomer in the 17th century in Germany. Miss Caroline Herschel discovered 2 moons and several comets. Miss Maria Mitchell of Nantucket, Massachusetts, discovered a new planet and received in consequence a medal from the King of Denmark. Authors. Many superior works of fiction have been written by ladies of America, some of which have been transcribed into the languages of Europe and introduced in those countries. Bible readers. An incalculable amount of good has been accomplished by this class of persons. They have now 200 such Bible women in England, Ireland, Scotland, and France, and they are meeting with unheard of success. Mrs. Reynard told me that they made soup for the poor and went and sold it to them very low, and in such a way that the poorest could have his bowl filled by some trifling service, and while one is serving the soup, others serve them with portions of God's word. Bankers and bank clerks. The idea of a savings bank was originated by a woman, Mrs. Priscilla Wakewood. It is a most worthy institution and deserving of support and patronage. Holding office in a bank is a very respectable situation. In large banks in the city of New York, the cashiers get from $4,000 to $6,000 per annum, while in the country banks they scarcely get half that amount. Tellers receive in large cities $2,500 to $3,000, and in small places from $1,200 to $2,000. Clerks get in New York banks from $600 to $3,000. In small towns they receive $300 to $2,500. Colonizationalist. This is a business that would have never entered our minds for women to engage in had it not been for the course pursued by Caroline Chisholm. As organizers of colonies, promoters of immigration, secretaries to colonies, etc. Many a husband and wife may thank her for the comforts of home life. Some years ago, Mrs. Farnham proposed taking from New York a shipload of women to California. The matter was laughed at and passed by, but we may believe the reports that came from California of miners wanting wives. Perhaps it would not have been a bad plan to take out a supply. Corpultors. This is an important field of missionary labor in our own land where women may be employed to great advantage. Distributors of tracts and books. The boards of publication now employ men only, whose services must be paid at a much higher rate than women would require. There are widows who need this employment for support, and single women who need employment for health, and many women would like this way of doing good. Copyist. Law copying is done by young women in charge of the Society of London for promoting the employments of women. Deaconesses. Orders of deaconesses was instituted at the same time as that of the deacon. It corresponds in duty with that office. We read of deaconesses in the last chapter of Romans, Phoebe, Priscilla, Aquila, etc. The establishment of institutions for deaconesses affords a home for the unmarried women in our land, widows without children, and furnishes them with such work as their health and previous employments fit them for. Dentist. Some time ago in New York, a few ladies prepared themselves for the practice of dentistry. We believe only one really practiced, and she but a short time. We find her name in the New York Directory as a dentist. Dentistry has been humorously called a woman's profession. There is nothing even in the surgical part of dentistry in which she is not adapted. Editresses. The most powerful instrument of disseminating general knowledge in the United States is the newspaper press. Fanny Fern, for instance, receives, as we have seen stated, the rate of $100 a column from Mr. Bonner for the contribution to the ledger. The sum total he will pay her for the amount he is engaged will be $6,000. Mrs. B receives $600 for editing a monthly paper. Government officers. Many government offices would be credibly filled by intelligent and experienced women. Miss Wallace and Miss Thomas were employed as computers on the Coast Survey of Washington in 1854 with salaries of $480, with prerequisites making it $600. Lawyers. We cannot question the right of women to plead at the bar. We doubt it would do her any good. She might study law to discipline her mind and store it with useful information. She might profitably spend in this way time that would otherwise be devoted to music, painting, or other languages. But the noisy scenes now witnessed in a courtroom are scarcely compatible with the reserve, quietude, and gentleness that characterize a woman of refinement. But if a lady will practice law, she will need a great clearness of mind, a great insight into the motives of others, fearlessness in impressing her convictions of the right, and ability in refraining from saying more than she should. Lecturers. Lecturing is addressing people through the sense of hearing. Writing is addressing them through the sense of sight. An individual can address much larger number by the latter plan than the former. Lucy Stone was paid $263 for her lectures in Bangor, Maine. Miss Dwight lectured on art a few years ago, charging the first $10 for a series of 6 lectures, but afterwards she reduced the price to $5. Librarians. There is a women's library in New York. The subject is to furnish women, particularly working women, who are not able to subscribe to other libraries with quiet and comfortable place to read in during their leisure moments. A lady in Darby, Pennsylvania attends a town library that was established in 1785. It has always been kept in the house of her family, and she has had no occasion to employ assistants outside her family. The Mercantile Library of New York, 2 ladies are in charge of the reading room. One receives $200 and the other $250 a year. Lady librarians receive 1/3 to 1/2 as much as men. Magazine and contributors. The Saturday Press says that Harper's Magazine pays its writers up to $7.50 to $10 per page. The Atlantic Monthly from $6 to $10. The Knickerbocker $3, which equals to $5 for Harper and $6 for the Atlantic. With the North American Review, $1.50 per page. Missionaries. Miss Rice, a missionary in Constantinople, has a large school for girls. Some of her scholars live in Constantinople, but most of them are from abroad, different parts of Turkey and Western Asia. The treasurer of the Dutch Reformed Mission said a single lady receives from $300 to $400 according to her qualifications. Piety and good common education are all that is necessary. Medical missionaries. An association in Philadelphia educates a limited number of ladies to go out as medical missionaries. Any information in regard to this association may be obtained from Mrs. Sarah J. Hale, 1418 Rittenhouse Square, Philadelphia. The enterprise opens to such missionaries a wide field of usefulness which cannot be reached any other way. Mrs. Hale was the editress of Godey's Ladies book. She's also the lady who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb and petitioned to have Thanksgiving as a national holiday. We don't hear about this woman very much, but she's a wonderful, godly Christian woman who did a lot of good work for the country. Physicians. It has only been in the last few years that women have received any preparation for the practice of medicine in our country, but now it is advancing in a way that is very gratifying to the friends of the cause, and is beginning to be appreciated by the people. Many of the most learned and talented men in the profession approve of women devoting themselves to the practice of medicine on their own sex and children. The mildness and the amiability of women, her modesty and delicacy and refinement, all tend to make her acceptable at the bedside. Her quick insight into the ailments of others and her promptness in offering a remedy enhance her value. Some think that the modesty and delicacy that should characterize a physician are lost to a lady in acquiring knowledge of the profession. We think not any more than by a gentleman. Why should the result be any different? Quite a number of lady physicians are employed in female boarding schools. Preachers. A friend once said the profession of ministers and lawyers ought to accord. One is the interpreter of the divine law, the other of human law. A preacher is a lawyer of heaven. The Quakers, Shakers, and Methodists, we think, are the only denominations in which women speak in religious meetings. Proofreaders. The reading of proof has become a regular branch of business. Many of the large houses and cities where publishing is done employ persons expressly for this business. We think proofreading opens up a charming prospect for the employment of cultivated women. Girls could just be as well trained to read manuscripts as aloud for proofreaders to correct their first sheets by as boys. A lady told me that one of her daughters assists her father with his newspaper. She reads the proof, looks up articles he wants, and helps select matter for the paper, and translates French stories for his paper. Her services are worth to him from $500 to $600 a year. On visiting the Bible house, I learned that a lady is employed as a proofreader. She corrects both English and German. 4 or 5 male proofreaders are employed, but she is the only lady. She gets $5 or $6 a week. The principal proofreader gets $12 a week. Accuracy, quickness of eye, thorough knowledge of orthography, grammar, and punctuation, with a knowledge of languages, and a vast deal of learning and general intelligence are necessary for a proofreader. Publishers. We find in the Census Report of Great Britain, 923 women are reported as booksellers and publishers. We know of 2 large publishing houses in New York that pay 10 cents on the dollar to an author the manuscript of any book they see proper to publish. That is, for the book they will sell at retail for $1, at wholesale for 60 cents. The author receives 10 cents, which gives the publisher 50 cents for getting up the book and running the risk of selling it. Readers to the working class. In China, at almost every store where cups of tea are sold, a number of men make it a business to read to those who come in to buy a drink. The working classes are not able to read and buy books, and thereby enabled the benefit of those who can. Now we do not see why the same principle should not be carried out in this country. Reporters. It is rather a new arena for the exercise of female talent. A reporter must be a close observer to the matters and things in general that pertain to individual or public affairs. A verbal or written account is furnished in the publication to which the reporter is interested. In the city or places of amusement, lectures, political, and church meetings form subjects of interest to a newspaper reporter. A telegraphic reporter told me a first-class reporter can earn from $25 to $30 for 3 or 4 hours of labor. Reviewers. A reviewer of new books should be a rapid reader and of quick understanding. A reviewer should also be a person of judgment. The number of those who devote themselves to a review of new books in England is small, and the United States still smaller. How they are paid I am unable to learn. Teachers. Teaching in its various branches would form a large volume, but we will endeavor to take it as general yet comprehensive as a view of the subject as our limits will permit. The influence of a teacher over her pupils is almost unbounded. In the public schools in New York, there are 39 gentlemen conducting the male departments who receive a salary of $1,500 per year, while of the lady principals, the female department, there are only 10 getting a salary of $800, which is the highest salary paid to a lady in the public schools in New York. There are said to be 1,183 teachers in New York City. In Louisville, Kentucky, a gentleman principal of the grammar schools receives a salary of $1,000 a year, the lady principal $650. The lady who teaches the mathematics at the Female Presbyterian College of Louisville has a salary of $900. And it kind of goes into all the different facets of teaching, which I'm not going to go into very much. I'm just going to say very little bit. So subsets of teachers, we need teachers of bookkeeping, teachers of gymnastics and dancing. And for the terms of this teacher, there's $6 a month, $6 for 1 month, $15 for 3 months, and $20 for 6 months tuition. At one gymnasium in New York, the terms are $16 a year for tuition, $10 for 6 months, and $7 for 3 months. Teachers of drawing and painting. Miss G receives a salary of $800 as a teacher of painting in the fine arts in the School of Fine Arts in Baltimore. Miss J charges $10 for instruction in Oriental painting. Mrs. C was profitably engaged in Providence for teaching drawing and taking crayon portraits. One lady who taught several years with success charged 50 cents a lesson attending at her room. Teachers of fancy work. At Madame D's, crochet work and embroidery are taught at 25 cents a lesson of 1 hour. Mrs. H, Philadelphia, gave 5 lessons in leather work for $6 and charged for giving instruction in wax fruit, flowers, paper and rice paper flowers, etc., $1 a lesson. Embroidery and silk, gold bullion, etc., $15 for 20 lessons. Madam N, who teaches crochet work and fancy knitting, charges 50 cents an hour. Teachers of horsemanship. The prices of riding school in New York are attended by the most aristocratic classes are 16 lessons for $20, 10 lessons for $15, and it keeps going on, so I'm not going to read all of it. Teachers of infant schools. Infants back then were children basically under the age of 6. So like even our first grade kids would be considered infants. Teaching is interesting to those who love children, but I would say let not those without patience and tenderness, or whose feelings can in an hour change from the boiling to the freezing point, attempt to teach young children. Teachers of music, teachers of navigation, teachers of swimming, and then that's it for teachers. The last one in this section is translators. Translations published in the United States are mostly made in England. Some languages are susceptible to much more correct and graceful translation than others. It requires study to get the exact meaning of some authors, and taste and genius to convey the meaning. A lady who translates considerably tells me she receives $5 a page for a finished translation from French for magazines. And that was it for our first section. Our next section is going to be artistic pursuits, employments connected with the fine arts. Starting with actress. The circumstances under which a play actor's life are seen are calculated to please the young and susceptible. They put a false estimate on the pleasure it affords. There is no amusement that may suffer the abuse. Late hours, intoxicating drinks, and bad companions in many cases form the curse of regular theater goers. And for these plays, perhaps harmless in themselves, are charged with being demoralizing. We think drama might be made more a school of instruction and innocent pastime, less a school of evil tendencies. There are good and virtuous people connected with the theater we cannot for a moment question. But some of the men are worthless and dissipated, and many of the girls and women engage in it because they see no other way in earning their bread. Many a ballet girl has danced to support an infirm mother or orphan brothers and sisters. The roving life of an actress and want of some home influences are not conducive to the growth of domestic virtues. Aquarium makers. One of the most innocent and pleasing amusements has attracted the attention for some in the making of aquaria. The cases are formed of plate glass, square, oblong, circular, or any shape that pleases the fancy of the owner. The glass is tightly sealed when joined. The aquaria are of two kinds. One is formed of salt water, which contains marine plants and animals. The other contains fresh water and such plants and animals that are found in rivers and smaller streams. They form a beautiful addition to garden, conservatory, or drawing room. Architects. We scarcely know to what extent yet this branch of business can come within the province of women. It is practical, perhaps, as some as we mentioned. Civil architecture is the only one open to women. It is in this art that we are people a little bit more than novices, yet great improvements are going on. Miss H told me a wealthy lady in New York who is quite an architect by nature. Cameo cutters. There are two types of cameo cutting. One is a lapidary's wheel of hard stones, as in the onyx or sardonyx. The shell cameos are with small steel chisels. When in Italy some years ago, I employed girls to polish my cameos and paid from 12 to 50 cents a piece. I think they earned about $1 a day. Copperplate engravers. In a hasty reading of Kay's Women Artists, we find mention made of a number of ladies occupied at various times in European countries as copperplate engravers. Daguerreans. The process consists of concentrating the light of the sun on a metal plate, so prepared by chemicals as to retain the impression of an image that falls upon it. The shadow catcher could become almost interwoven with everyday realities of life. Colorers of photographs could, if skillful and constantly employed, earn $30 a week in large cities. An operator, if busy, works from 9 to 5 o'clock in winter. Schools of design. Schools of design were established in 444 BC with the purpose of improvement in making statuary. In 1854, nearly 1,500 students have been educated in the School of Arts in Edinburgh. A lady teacher in the New England School of Design has a salary of $400. Miscellaneous designers. Designing a particular is more a natural than a cultivated talent. Women are paid according to their proficiency and earn from $3 to $15 per week. Women receive the same compensation as men if they do the work as well and as fast, but ordinarily they cannot do either. Designer of calico prints. This employment is well adapted to women. It requires taste and ingenuity. These labors are light, but rather confining. A person of lively fancy and nice powers of discrimination succeeds best. The gay, rich, dark colors of winter are not suitable for summer, nor are the light, delicate ones for summer suitable for winter clothing. The inviting field of labor, which is now unbarren to women, we hope will be well improved. The price generally paid for a design pattern for calicos is from $1 to $3. Designers for wallpaper. One of the most important branches of designing is that of preparing patterns for wallpaper, fire screens, etc. The usual price for a good hall design is from $12 to $20, and for a paper of a room from $12 to $16. Draughtswoman. There is several types of draughting or drawing on stone, architectural, mechanical, letter, and figure, and landscape. Very few women have undertaken draughting in any of its branches, but we do not see why it should be confined to men. Employees in the United States Mint. A very interesting description of the employment of ladies in the United States Mint at Philadelphia will be found in Goody's Ladies' Book, August of 1852. For adjusting the weight of coins, attending or feeding the coin presses, I consider women not inferior to men, except they cannot endure the work for as great a number of hours. Engravers and chasers of silver and gold. I was told by a lady in Philadelphia that had been engaged with her husband some years in chasing the backs of gold watches, which had been laid by quite a snug fortune, that from $5 to $6 is paid for the engraving of a watch case. An engraver cannot well work more than 9 hours a day. Ornamental engraving is done by some jewelry manufacturers by women. They earn from $4 to $5 a week, but men from $15 to $18. Women cannot do their work as well as men. Equestrians and gymnasts. In equestrian entertainments, much depends on the accessories. Without music, artificial light, and paintings, it would be rather tame. The athletic exercises require vigor and firmness of muscle. One should be trained from the earliest of childhood. Etchers and stamp cutters. In England in the 17th century, Anna and Susanna Lister were regarded as having as much skill in the notable art of etching. They illustrated a work on natural history written by their father. Herbarium makers. Herbariums are collections of dried plants. They are formed by gluing to sheets of paper the flowers and leaves of plants after they have been pressed and dried. To botanists, they are useful, and the choice collection is a frail but pretty ornament for a center table. Lapidaries. A skillful manipulation is necessary to the business of a lapidary. If a woman has sufficient firmness of nerve to perform the duties of a surgeon, we do not see why she should not have for the cutting of precious stones. Landscape gardeners. Mrs. R often goes and looks at gardens, directs how to lay them out, and what to buy for them. She then orders the plants of others and sells on commission, having them arranged according to their taste. Her purchases are made of a German living some distance from town who can raise them cheaper than she could in the city. Her compensation, of course, varies greatly. Lithographers. The impressions for chalk drawings is made by delicate manipulations with crayon and pencils, for ink drawings with steel pens and camel hair brushes. It requires one skilled in the use of a pencil. Lithographing is very lucrative to a skillful artist. Map makers. Women could not be well traveled about to obtain information on localities for the making of maps, but nearly all of the manual labor connected to the business would be very suitable to them. Lithographing maps is said to be a profitable branch of the art and opens a field to competent women. I was told by a lady who colored maps that is trying on the eyes and poorly compensated. A map maker says he is always most busy in the fall and then employed from 12 to 16 women. In winter, he employed half that number. Mr. W pays 2 of his best and most experienced lady workers a certain sum by the week, and they hire girls and women to work for them. The profits of these 4 women, aside from their own work, earn from about $1.50 to $2 a week for the year round. Medalist. Beatrice Hermione worked at medallions and in 1700 elaborated a large medallion of Pope Innocent XII. Modelers. An ornamental designer and modeler writes me, in England I attended my lady pupils at their own residences, except for one whom I gave instruction at my residence. One was for the daughter of the Lord Mayor of the city, another the daughter-in-law of Earl of H. Modelers of wax figures. Catherine Quisitor, who lived in Amsterdam about 200 years ago, besides possessing many other accomplishments, was a modeler in wax. Mineral labelers and wranglers. A lady could not easily make a collection of minerals, but she might find it an absorbing occupation to arrange and label them. A geologist writes me, no women are employed in my business. It requires half of a lifetime to become fitted for the duties of a geologist, and the knowledge of engineering and most of the natural sciences is needed. Drafting in the office is the only part suitable for women. Musicians. I have known 2 lady organists who were considered superior performers, received as good salaries as a gentleman would have done. One receives $500 for playing twice on Sabbath. On weekdays, she gave instruction. Music engravers and folders. Mr. L engraves and prints music and employs 2 ladies to fold it. There are but few music engravers. A lady in New Orleans engraves whose husband is a music printer, but it would require about 2 to 3 years to learn it. Opera performers. The first opera of modern times was by the close of the 15th century. Painters. Less prejudice exists against artists than teachers in France. They have privileges that teachers cannot. Painting is considered a most desirable profession by parents for their daughters. Miss F, New York, established a life school for lady artists. 1 subject is used at a time. The classes are limited. 2 classes, 8 or 10 pupils in each. Those that need instruction will pay $12 for 22 lessons. Painting is kind of like teaching. It has a bunch of sub-painters. So sub-painters would be animal painters, painters of banner, crayon and pastel painters, painters of fruit and flowers, fresco painters, historical painters, landscape painters, marine painters, miniature painters, panorama painters, portrait painters, watercolor painters, painters of dial plates, picture restorers, and that would be it. Piano tuners. We think a piano tuner might form a class of ladies and give instruction in the art. $1 is the usual price for tuning a piano in the city. Wow, I wish it was that cheap now. One should have an acute sense of hearing. Practice is best gained in a piano factory. Plaster statuary. The few women in this country who work in plaster of Paris are, as far as we know, natives of other countries. Painters of plates for books. Hundreds of thousands of plates are annually colored in London, the same for this country. The neatness and patience of women fit them admirably for this work. A gentleman who prepares stereoptic plates for Messrs. A employed several ladies, on whom he paid on average from $9 to $10 a week, working by the piece. The gentleman who prepares the fashion plates for the Ladies American magazine employs women paying from $4 to $7 a week. Photographist and colorist. Mr. F says he would employ good lady artists if he could get them, but ladies do not succeed so well because they do not have the efficient course of training, nor go through the same gradations in preparing of their work. They mostly employ men that are foreigners to colors. The colorist of photographic views for stereoscopes, he says he pays a lady to color for him for $6 a gross. English ladies color the best. Preparers of scientific plate. Mrs. B has supported herself for some time by making drawings of fossils to work on geology. She is now doing one for work on Nigeria and requires a great deal of care. Steel engravers. Steel engraving is cutting in a precious stone or letters in a device. The cutting is done by a lathe and sharp cutting tools. Diamond dust and oil are used. Steel engravers in New York earn from $10 to $12 a week, but the occupation there is filled. Sculptors. Quite a famous sculptor here in Texas would be Elizabeth Ney. She was one of the famous female sculptors of the 19th century. I used to docent at her house. She also has a free museum in Austin. It's called Formosa here over in Austin. You'll learn about Elizabeth Ney. Steel and other engravers. Steel and copper engravings require a great deal of knowledge of drawing and careful manipulation. Banknote engravers. Steel engraving was first practiced in England by the calico printers, but it was first employed for banknotes for the common designs of Jacob Perkins of Newburyport, Massachusetts. It requires but a few weeks to learn the part by girls. Some are paid $3, some are paid $3.50 per week. They are mostly American girls. A lady told me that she heard a girl who was employed to cut up banknotes done with scissors and says she often earned $9 a week. Card engravers. I was told by a card engraver this is not usual to pay a learner anything. He gives his apprentice only his board for the first year. A card engraver can earn $5 a day if he is industrious and has sufficient work. Some card engravers earn $2,000 a year, clear of all expenses. A journeyman is paid in proportion to his abilities, from $5 to $25 per week. Door plate engravers. I was told by a door plate engraver that a skillful person would apply himself closely, could learn the business, so that at the end of the year he could make a living. Map engravers. Map engraving is divided into two kinds, the lettering and the plain work. The last can be learned in 6 months by a person of taste and talent. The most that is needed is practice. The best map engraving done in Paris is executed by ladies. There are also some ladies employed in map engraving in London, and card engraving there is quite common for ladies. Picture and heraldry engravers. Engraving pictures pays very well, a man often earning $10 a day. Telegraph operators, a new source of employment that has been owned by the invention of the electric telegraph. Most of the telegraphing in England is done by women, and in the United States a number of ladies are employed as operators. To a quick, intelligent mind, it requires but a short time to learn. A female proficient with an inclination to useful employment would make a good telegraphist and might readily command a salary from $300 to $500 and be profitable to her employers beyond the ordinary male telegraphs employed under the present arrangement of office. To Mr. A, connected with the New York and Boston telegraph line, I am indebted for the following information. Quote, women are employed in the operating of the Morse instrument. They are paid from $6 to $25 a month and are paid by the month. For the classes of offices in which females are employed, about the same wages are paid to both sexes. It requires from 3 to 6 weeks to learn, and nothing is paid while learning. Vocalist. This is important and profitable employment, one that has secured to many poor foreigner visiting this country a snug little fortune. We have only to cite the cases of Jenny Lind, Garcia, Sontag, Perotti, and Catherine Hayes, Adelaide Patty, Miss Henkel, are at present the most noticed singers of American birth. Mr. C told me that in New York, lady singers receive from $100 to $400 per annum singing in churches. One lady in a fashionable church receives $1,000, but she is a widowed and somewhat favored. Another lady, leaning in the choir of a Broadway church, receives a salary of $1,000, I have been told. Waxwork. I called on two Italians that make wax fruit. Their baskets vary in price from 25 cents to $2. It would take a day and a half to make a $2 basket. The Italian that could speak some English told me that when he goes out to work, he charges $2.50 a day, but to give lessons, he would charge $2 a day. He thought an individual might learn in 8, 10, 12, or 15 lessons according to the ability and tastes. Miss W, a teacher of wax flowers, charges $1 a lesson and thinks 8 to 10 lessons sufficient. She thinks in country places there would be an opening for teachers. Wood engravers. Much and long continued toil is requisite in success for wood engraving. A great deal depends also on the talent of the individual. Women's nimble fingers, accustomed to wield a needle, lend themselves quite easily to minute operations in the use of small instruments and the almost imperceivable shades of manipulation that wood engraving exacts. And we're going to have to pause it here because I am only 1/5 of the way done through this book. It's already going to be somewhat on the longer side of episodes, judging by the script. This is going to take more installments than I initially thought. I thought I could do all this in one episode, but obviously that's not going to happen. So we'll do it likely in 4 parts, I think. Maybe 5, we'll have to see. But I think this is going to be an excellent podcast to spark discord and discussion in the comments. There are so many things we can talk about, such as what profession surprised you the most as being appropriate for women or already had women employed. I knew about female doctors already. That was in a Godey's Ladies article, so that didn't surprise me at all. Dentistry somewhat surprised me, I think, a little bit, although it doesn't seem that big of a jump because of the doctor thing. I do know that there were female postmistresses in the U.S. I think telegraph operators. I think that was the one I was like, I don't know why. I don't think that women would be in that, but apparently that's something they did. So that was very interesting to me. Also, another question for you. Out of all of the options given in just today's episode, what profession would you most likely take on if you were in the 1860s? I think for me, it'd have to be calico designer. That sounds like so much fun. Designing fabrics, that just sounds amazing. So I think out of the options, I would probably pick that one. And I hadn't even considered that there were people getting paid to design fabrics. I mean, it makes total sense. Like, if you have fabric, you have to have someone designing it, right? That makes perfect sense. But to make it your profession, like, that's just an interesting concept to me. I do think this is going to be a great mini-series for living historians, particularly in that mid-19th century range, particularly the single living historians. Because I remember back when I was single and first starting that I had a big struggle figuring out where I fit in, because I was falling into that, well, a single woman would never be by herself in the 1860s. And that's mostly the case, but it's not always the case, you know? And so there are options for single women to earn a living for themselves in the 19th century. And I wish I had this book. I just didn't know where to look at the time. But it would be very nice to have known all these options. I could have come up with something that I could do instead of just slapping together whatever. Usually what I would do is pretend that my father was somewhere, like I lived with my parents and that my mother died, so it was just like me and my father, and my brothers were off at work. So usually it's this American Civil War. Father was told, and it would just be one of those things like, oh, he's out in the field today, like pretending that I wasn't living alone, which is fine for like a day event. It's kind of harder to do for like a weekend thing. I have in the past. I think my very first event, both my parents passed away, and so I was under the care of my brother who went off to war, and so the town doctor graciously took me in. I was kind of like a help to the doctor and was able to assist with his physician duties. That was my profession-ish for that event, and that was a fun one. That was my very first event. I met so many good friends that weekend, so that was fun. But I do wish I was made aware prior to starting living history, like all the options I could have had, because that would have been so much fun to like pick one of these things that would have made a good living, like around that $500 to $600 range, and like really studied in depth this one thing and became really good at it. And I think that'd be an awesome demonstration for living history purposes. Not that I still couldn't do it. I mean, I absolutely could. I tend to do more things like household and house related events right now, and so I don't have to do any of that, but I think it'd be fun to work on a few of these and maybe hone some skills and perhaps pretend to make a little bit of money. Or I could, and some of these things you actually could make money doing, like the wax flower and fruit making. Like that would, I'm sure there are some living history sites who would love to have that skill or something on display to demonstrate that skill. So you might actually be able to take some of these professions and turn that into a little bit of extra income to maybe supplement the living history costs, if you know what I mean, you know, the gas and the fabric and all of that. So that might be something to look into as well. But I do think talking about some of these professions will help us as living historians create more nuanced and a variety of impressions and jobs, essentially, so that we're not all just farmers. Which, okay, yes, a lot of people were farmers back in the day, but not everyone at a living history event needs to be a farmer. So I think this will help us branch out a little bit more, studying this type of thing. So I'm very glad I stumbled across, I'm very glad that this exists. Like, Mrs. Penny is a saint for doing all of this and putting together all of this research for us. I'm sure she had absolutely no idea how it was going to be used when she first published it. But I do think this will provide some excellent thought-provoking ideas about what women were considered capable of and what they were doing in the mid-19th century. Particularly during wartime, how could you supplement your income when your husband is gone? That sort of thing. And that will just about wrap up this episode of One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of Employments for Women. I look forward to doing part 2 next time. So generally with these types of series, I would break it up. I'd do like one a month, and I'd break it up with something in between because we do 2 podcasts a month. But I'm thinking it might be just better to go through this whole series in our podcast and then start with something else. I've been kind of debating. I don't always like to doing the same thing over and over and over again, because I figured if you're not interested in one topic, it'd be a while before you got something else you were interested in. But I also wonder if some people might like to have all the information on one topic first and then moving on to another topic, if that makes sense. I'm not entirely sure. I've been doing, of course, the every other podcast or every couple podcast, doing like the series on women's health, which we still haven't finished, by the way. There's still a couple of episodes we can do with that. So we're going to try something different and do it all at once. Let me know if you kind of like that style or if you prefer it to be broken up, so I can take that in mind when I plan future longer, mini-series. If you have any questions or comments, you can find me on YouTube or Instagram under the name Caitlin Kearns. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. If you did, please leave a review on Spotify or comment on YouTube and share this episode with your friends. And please don't hesitate to tell me what topics you would like me to cover in future episodes. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.